This is part 2, and part 1 was really about the Atlantis myth in the context of Egyptian magic. And I'll go back now to the creation myth of Egypt, and it will allude to the Atlantis myth as well, so I can kind of fill in different areas. In the creation myth, you have the cosmos as perceived as a watery abyss. So you can imagine the cosmos as being a kind of primal energy, and that energy is, you might say, a vast ocean. And out of that primeval water emerges the primeval mound. And the primeval mound is a symbol of the Godhead. And it's also referred to as a step mound. So you have the idea of the first pyramid, the step pyramid, being based on the primeval step mound. So it emerges, as I've alluded to in the Atlantis myth, as a volcanic island. So it's known as an island constellation. So all the star systems are really island constellations. They're known as Isles of Fire, and they infer the nature of the pyramid, or the triangle, the element fire. On the primeval mound is built the temple, and in the centre of the temple would be a pillar. And I said in the Atlantis myth there was a mountain, and there was a temple, and there was a central red pillar, and that's where they worshipped the sky god Zeus, and they sacrificed a bull to Zeus. And the nine priests were dressed in blue robes, and they alluded to the Ennead of Heliopolis. And the Ennead are the archetypal entities, or the invisible aspect of the universe. So they're really, you might say, they're concealed in the watery abyss. And the idea is that the high god Osiris and his mate Isis, in effect, they spit forth the seeds of the race. They spit forth those who are going to become initiates. And so anyway, so we have the temple with the pillar. And when Set kills Osiris by putting him in a box and nailing the box down, he throws the box into the Nile River, and it goes into one of the 7 tributaries or mouths of the delta, the marshes and swamps of the delta. And it lodges in an acacia tree, and that acacia tree is cut down and made as the central pillar in the palace of the king of Byblos in Phoenicia. So again we have the idea of the pillar at the centre of the temple, as we did on Atlantis. And in terms of the incarnation of Ra, the sun god, we have the idea of the Apis bull. So Osiris is the dead Apis bull, and Horus is the living Apis bull. So they kill the Apis bull, and then in effect it's reborn as Horus. And the Horus as the reborn king is suckled by the cow goddess Isis. Now, originally, the cow goddess, known as Hathor, or later as Nut, the cow goddess, she was the sky goddess. So you see the cow as, in effect, the cosmos, and all across the body of the cow are the star systems. And one way of looking at it is also the fact that when Horus is suckled by the cow goddess on the milk, then you could say in effect that alludes to the Milky Way. And the Milky Way passes through many of the constellations in our galaxy, and you could say that the milk is the nectar of the gods, or the ambrosia of the gods, which gives immortality. Another form of the middle pillar you find in biblical accounts of Exodus, where Moses enters the most holy place, which is a gold-plated cube, and he stands before the acacia ark, and the Lord God appears in a pillar of cloud and fire. So again, we have the fire, we have the red pillar, which again is in the center of the tabernacle, which is a large tent. It's the portable house of God. And of course, the gold-plated cube later becomes the gold-plated Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple, and it's also known as the oracle room. Now, in Moses's gold-plated cube, in the most holy place, you have the acacia ark, and then you have the pillar of fire and cloud, and above the acacia ark, or the Ark of the Covenant, you have two winged cherubim, and they would be synonymous with the phoenix, and the phoenix is the oracular bird. So in Egyptian magic, the phoenix is the oracular bird, and you see her seated on a pole that's extending out of a pyramidal isle of fire. So you could say, in effect, the phoenix perches on top of the pillar in the center of the temple. Now, if you look at the step pyramid, which is the house of Osiris, and the step pyramid is also the figure of Osiris, then you would see the vertical line going from the apex to the base as the spinal column of Osiris, and the 6 steps would be 6 of the chakras, and at the crown of the step pyramid, where the sunboat lands, that would be the 7th chakra, and that's where you exit the body when you're reborn. So Horus appears in the sunboat along with the phoenix. So the phoenix is perched at the top of the temple, or the top of the step pyramid in the sunboat, and that is ferried by Thoth to an island constellation. For example, Horus will be taken to Sirius, the star system of his mother Isis. In the Temple of the Phoenix in Heliopolis, the city of the sun, you have the Ben stone, which is the omphalos, signifying the centre of the earth, or the centre of the world. And that's synonymous really with the step pyramid, in the sense that that's also the centre of the world. And the base of the step pyramid aligns to the 4 cardinal points, and the whole house of Osiris, you might say, aligns to Draco, which is the seat of the eternal king Osiris. So when you're reborn, you're called an Osiris because your destination is Draco. You become an Osiris, but you also identify with Osiris in Orion. So in effect, you're also reborn in terms of Orion. So the phoenix is perched at the top of a pole above the Isle of Fire, which is a triangular shaped edifice like the volcano or the step pyramid, and she flies in effect from Draco down through the sun, through the planets, and she lands on the Benben stone in her temple, and she also lands, you might say, or travels with the sun boat, which lands on top of the step pyramid. And she brings with her the seed of the race, or you might say the crystal that symbolizes the life force. And we've said that the crystal, the seed, is actually the seed of the dragon Draco, because Osiris, in effect, incarnates in Horus, who's actually the king. So he's the dragon king of Egypt. We talked about the Nile Delta as being the fourth letter of the Greek alphabet, which would be a triangle, and we liken that to a volcanic island or a volcano, to the pyramid or step pyramid, and the Atlantis myth was told inside, as it were, the pyramid. Now Sais is not far from Buto, and in Buto, the ancient chemists, you have a floating island, which again could allude to a volcanic island like Atlantis, and that is called the place of the throne, and it's also the primeval mound. So you have in Buto, you have the primeval mound, and on the primeval mound is an acacia tree, and under the acacia tree, Isis gives birth to Horus. So again, you have the acacia tree, and that becomes, when Osiris's body is inside the trunk of the acacia tree, that becomes the central pillar of the king's palace in Byblos, Phoenicia. And so the primeval mound is known as the place of the throne. So Buto is only a few miles from Sais, where the Atlantis myth. So you could say that's again a support of the idea of a floating island, and you have the pillar or the acacia tree, and also it's the district or nome of the heron, and the grey heron is the phoenix. So again, you could have the phoenix perching on top of the acacia tree, i.e. on top of the primeval mound or the temple or the step mound. And all of that really is in support of the Atlantis myth. So if we look at the Ennead, we have the high god, the chief, Osiris. Then we have Shu, represents space and light and air. Then Tefnut or Ma'at, she represents the cosmic order. Then we have Nut, the sky goddess. and then we have Geb, the earth god. Then we have Osiris, Isis, Set and Nephis. Now, Osiris, as the chief god, was originally Atum, and also later becomes Ra. Now, if Osiris is the chief god, but he's also one of the 8, then he is replaced by Horus. So in effect, you can add Horus onto the Ennead, and in effect that becomes that actually alludes to the idea of the initiate, the follower of Horus, actually becoming part of the Ennead. So you could say that when you become a fixed star in the heavens, in Orion for example, you're also related to Draco, and you're also related to the Ennead, because Osiris is chief of the Ennead. But more importantly, the initiate of Thoth actually becomes the One. So you actually go outside of the actual cosmos, and you identify with the One. And in Egyptian mythology, nothing is said about the One. It's just left blank. There's no actual description of the One. It's simply the One. But there is the idea that Thoth is the grand architect of the universe. So in effect, if you think of him, you might say as an expression of the One, or the implication that the One designs the universe. And when we say that the consort of Thoth is Ma'at, and she's cosmic order, then you could say in effect that the grand architect, Thoth, the lord of the law of Ma, creates the law of Ma in the form of cosmic order. And there is the idea mentioned by David Wilcox of the law of One, and the law of One really is the law of Ma'at. So you have the One, and then you might say emanating as a kind of creation out of the One, you might say, is the concept of the universe, or the concept of the cosmos. And the law of Ma, as above so below, is the cosmic order reflected in the world order. And in Tibetan Buddhism, that would be known as the Dharma. So the Dharma is really the law of Buddha. And Buddha enters nirvana, and that's called the one mind. So you have the principle of the one in Tibetan Buddhism as well. And in Chinese Taoism, you have the Tao as the great one, as it's told in The Secret of the Golden Flower. So that's the great one. And then in Platonic sense, or Neoplatonism, in the works of Plotinus, he writes about the One. And then he writes about the second level is the intelligible world. So the intelligible world is really when things become manifest, and you might say they take on the kind of architecture of the universe, or they take on the archetypal nature of the Ennead, that then project into the visible universe the symbolic code of the gods in terms of the zodiac and other star systems, where each god has a magical name, a magical formulae, and that's what I call the meta-programming. So in effect, the mind or the psyche is meta-programmed in symbolic form. And so when you dream and have visions, have synchronicities, revelations, epiphanies, then really you're experiencing the emanation from an archetypal code that's invisible in the background, and it manifests in the psyche as the symbolic code. So you could say that there's a template or a source within the psyche, and you can call it the archive house in ancient Egypt, or it could be the Akashic records, or you might say a meta program that you can access through intuition, through synchronicity, through revelation, through inspiration. So at the level of, say, human capability, you would refer to that which gains access to the archive house, which is the house of the recording angel, Thoth. Because in the archive house, Thoth inscribes the crystal tablet with your life story, your fate and your destiny. He preordains your life. He's already written down the symbolic code that throughout your life will manifest as synchronicity, as dream, as vision, as revelation. And so the idea of the genius in the Greek mythology is your spiritual guardian, that everybody's born with their spiritual genius. But in the West or European culture, the genius is really, you might say, the creator of culture, what we call culture, painting, music, art. In fact, it's the in the nature of the 9 muses. So the muses are really the prophetic voice coming from the prophetic fountain. So again, you imagine the source springing forth in terms of a living water, and that's the voice of the muses, and they express the various faculties dealing with astronomy, dealing with poetry, dealing with history. So all of the cultural aspects are accessed by genius, and therefore you have people like Pablo Picasso and Albert Einstein and Michelangelo and Plato and Jesus and Buddha. They're all accessing the meta program that puts them in contact with the star system and the nature of the gods. So last time I talked about how the scarab was revealed to me, and I interpreted the scarab, and as I interpreted the scarab, I had more visions, more intuitions, more synchronicities, and in the end I integrated that symbol into my own life. So you could say I cracked the symbolic code of the scarab, which represents death, transformation and rebirth. Also, what happened just before the emergence of the scarab into my life, I wrote about the Black Rose. And in London in 1988, I had an image of the Black Rose. And then by synchronicity, I discovered a book, a black book, called The Black Rose. And then when we came back from London to Oxford, I actually met a girl called Rosa, and she was a goth dressed in black. So you might say the image in my mind as a fantasy or an image of the imagination then materialized as an actual woman dressed in black called Rosa. Well, then the scarab occurred, and then we left Oxford and went north to Lancaster, about 200 miles, and it's situated in the county of Lancashire. Now, Lancaster, its emblem is the red rose. And Lancaster, in the War of the Roses in the 15th century, they fought against the House of York. You've got the House of Lancaster, the red rose, and the House of York is the white rose in Yorkshire, the county that's on the east coast, and Lancashire's on the west coast. And in the middle you've got the Pennine, the chain of Pennine Hills and the moors. And after the end of the War of the Roses, the Lancaster was victorious, and they united the white rose and the red rose in what is called the Tudor rose. And then the Tudors became Henry VIII and his daughter Elizabeth I. Now, when we left Lancaster and came down to where I am now, Colchester in Essex near London on the east coast, I've been here for a number of years, and I was studying all the mythology and the magic and writing about my life and everything that's happened in my life, and try to understand all the symbols. And I went into the castle grounds in the park, and right in front of the castle there were some gold roses. They'd just been planted, they'd been grown by a local horticulturalist, and so the castle rose became the gold rose. So I had the black rose in London and Oxford, the red and white rose in Lancaster, and then I come here and I find the gold rose in front of the gold castle, you might say, the golden castle. So they're the alchemical colours, and that describes the alchemical opus, or the alchemical work, the great work. So that just shows, like the black rose, that just shows that manifests in terms of my life, and yet those things have really nothing to do with me, and yet they symbolize my life. And you might think, well, how does, what does the War of the Roses, the white and red rose, have to do with me? Well, it's interesting because I was born in Lancashire. Lancaster's in Lancashire. I was born in Lancashire, and my ancestors actually founded Lancashire. And the ancestor that founded Lancashire had the name Garnet or Gurney, but it became Garnet, and that was my maternal grandparents' name, and I was born in their house, the Garnet. And the garnet is a red cube, a red crystal, and so I'm going from Oxford to Lancashire, to Lancaster. There's the red rose, and when I was in Lancaster, I had a vision of a gold mask entity with big black oval eyes, reminiscent of the aliens, you might say, and alien intelligence. And in that vision I was given a red cube. So I had the red cube vision of my ancestry in Lancaster, and then discovered that the emblem of Lancaster is the red rose. So there's again a correspondence between the two things. And if you think of Thoth as the grand architect of the universe, who actually designs everything in the universe, you might say geometrically, and then he's also the recording angel that writes on your crystal tablet, your life that's going to manifest as you live, and all the magical formulae of the hieroglyphic signs in the Book of the Dead, they're all going to manifest in your life if you tune in, as it were, to the genius, or you tune into the source of the symbolic code or the meta program. And so you can see that synchronistically everything is actually designed to work. You might say, just as the genetic code is designed to work and produces the body in more or less perfect form, there are mutations, they're negative things, but it's basically in the child, it's a beautiful, fully perfect form. And you could say in the psyche, equally, the child is born with the potential perfect psyche. But because of the conditioning, just as in nature, everything is born beautiful, and then as the animal and the plants survive in nature, they get damaged. They all get damaged, and that affects that mutates negatively in the genetic code. So, we grow up, and then we might get illnesses, and we might not be able to study very well, and we're not. Some people are good at music, other people are good at working with nature. So you have all these different abilities, but everything, you might say, becomes imperfect. But the idea of initiation is to realign yourself with the world order of Ma'at, the law of Ma'at, or you could say the cosmic order, the law of Ma'at, and that's living to the Dharma, it's living to the Tao, and you realign your psyche to the symbolic code, and by studying the symbolic code, by tuning your thought and your psyche to the symbolic code, then I believe you realign your life and put it on the right track, you might say. So, in terms of putting it on the dragon path, the Tao, the path of the Tao, the dragon path, you realign and you align yourself to the ley lines, which are also the dragon path. So, the Alfred Watkins old straight track. So in Australia, in the Aboriginal culture, you travel along the lines of song from spirit centre to spirit centre, just like you go from temple to temple, church to church, or whatever. And from Stonehenge to some other place, the Rollright Stones in the Cotswolds near Oxford. I stayed a night there. My friend was a pagan and was actually the curator of Rollright Stones. I stayed a night in his shed on the site. And so you might say Thoth reveals to you the symbols in your life that if you study them, you align yourself to them, then you get back onto the right track. That makes sense. And then, in a sense, you might say the crystal tablet, that itself symbolizes perfection. So my family, my bloodline is really the red crystal, the red cube, the garnet. Now, in the cubic crystal system of the garnet, there are 5 members, or N members. One of them is pyrope, and it's known as fiery eye. And another one is the carbuncle, and that's known as the third eye. So you have the fiery eye, you have the third eye. And when your third eye is open, you're able to see through the veil of illusion, you're able to see through Maya. So that means to say that on the surface, your consciousness has become imperfect. You can't see your life and then suddenly you're having synchronicities, revelations, and you begin to attune to that deeper level of understanding, and through intuition, etc., then your third eye is open, which is intuitive wisdom, or Bodic insight, which means enlightened insight. So then you begin to have what you might call in Zen moments of enlightenment. So Zen Satori really is seeing through the three-dimensional aspect of reality into the fourth dimensional aspect of reality, what they call third density, fourth density. And so you might say the Buddha realized his fourth density reality, and he entered nirvana and put on the body of wisdom, or the diamond body. Again, you've got the reference to the diamond body, the crystal. So a crystal, again, is related to perfection. So in the Tibetan Buddhism, you have the Trikaya. Now, the Trikaya are the three bodies. So you have nirvana, which is the highest level, which is shunyata, meaning emptiness. And that is the body of wisdom, the diamond body, and the clear light of the one mind. Now the next level down, you have the visionary body. So in the psyche, the meta-program of the gods is the visionary body, the body of perfect endowment. So they're the attributes of the Godhead, or the attributes of Buddha, and they're represented by the 5 orders of Dhyani, who are the Buddhas of meditation, and they're seated in the form of a mandala. So you've got four in the corners, the 4 corners, and the one in the centre, and they're seated on various thrones. Like the one in the centre represents the sun and is seated on a lion throne. And of course in ancient Egypt you have the solar lion king Horus, who's the initiate that's reborn as Thoth. So just, you might say, when you're seated on the lion's seat, as Solomon in his temple was seated on the lion's seat, then in a sense, that's the root guru. You've gone to the root, that's the root guru, and from there you go into nirvana. And that's the realm of the bodhisattvas, the Buddhas of compassion, who incarnate on earth. And then the lowest level, the third level, the Nirmanakaya, is the incarnate body. So Buddha had 3 bodies when he walked around the earth. So he was in the perfect enlightened state, and then when he was teaching his wisdom, he was in his visionary body, he was in his psyche, and he was also physically walking around and living a normal life. So we see the 7 chakras in the step pyramid, and because the step pyramid is actually the figure of Osiris, which means that below the, you might say, the legs and the feet on the ground is the cube. Then when you come up to the body, the sexual energy, the fiery energy of the heart, then you have the triangle, or the womb of Isis, and inside, you might say, the red womb of Isis, because she's the red serpent goddess, like the Kundalini, and that's the heart in the centre of the trunk, or the torso. She gives birth to Horus as the sun seed. He's the sun seed that's come up from the sexual level. The navel is also the seed, and in the heart, you might say, in ancient Egypt, that was the source of consciousness and knowledge. So you have the heart area is the red triangle, as it were, and the sun seed is inside that, and that becomes the eye of Horus, the visionary eye of Horus, which is the center level. So you're in the visionary realm, and fire is always related to vision, having visions. And so the sun seed then rises and comes out of the mouth at the top of the womb, as it were, the opening of the womb, and it becomes the sun. So it becomes the golden circle of the sun. So in that you have the figure of Osiris. You have the golden head, and you have the red triangular body, and then you have the black square or the cube. So you have the cube, the cone, and the sphere. So there's the cube, the cone, and the sphere, which make up the figure of Osiris, which is the form of the sun of the step pyramid. So if you look at the step pyramid, you have Earth, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury, and then you have the sun. So again, you have the 7 chakras in that formation. I mean, it says that Buddha was, he left home at the age of 29. He had 2 teachers who taught him the knowledge of Brahmanism, which was the religion of the time. And then he became an ascetic as a forest hermit for 5 years. And when he was 36, he underwent the death, transformation, and rebirth. So he's visited by the evil Mara, who tempts him, just like Satan tempted Jesus. And then the Naga appears. Now the Naga, they were the Aboriginal serpent kings of ancient India before the arrival of the Aryans. And the Aryans really, you might say, then gave rise to Hinduism and what we call Indian mythology. But before that, there were these Aboriginal serpent kings called the Nagas. And a Naga appears, and he's the initiate of wisdom. But it shows that in terms of the Kundalini as well, that Buddha is actually of the line of the Dragon Kings. He's actually of that lineage of the Dragon Kings, just as Osiris is lineage of the Dragon Kings, and also King Arthur in England is in the lineage of the Dragon Kings, the Pendragons. And then he's enlightened. So as the night becomes the day, the morning star appears, which is Venus. The morning star appears, and then the sun rises, and that symbolizes his rebirth, as it does in ancient Egypt. And you see Buddha, the statues of Buddha, with the third eye, and also with the golden halo, which again reflects the idea of the golden head. So in the Greek mystery schools, the initiates were known as the children of the golden head. And in the Holy of Holies, the gold-plated cube, Moses' face shone as the sun before the Lord God, appearing as a pillar of cloud and fire. And in Revelations, it says that Jesus' eyes were of fire, of flame and fire, and his face shone as the sun. So again, you've got the illuminated head of the various systems. Because once you become a solar deity, then in effect you're a star, and all suns are part of the star systems. That means you're master of the meta program. You've mastered the names of the gods. So you're empowered with the magic of Thoth, the One. And that's signified as the tarot Magus card, the first card of the tarot. We're talking before about in part one, about Parsifal and his vision of the Grail. Well, Parsifal was actually born in Snowdon, on Mount Snowdon in North Wales, northwest Wales, and that area is known as the land of Beli, and Beli is the ancient British sun god, and he's actually a dragon. So it's really, he's born in the land of the dragon. And he's in the woods, he's in the forest one day, and he sees the knights of the Round Table from King Arthur, and they're travelling through the forest, and their armour shines in the light, this silvery light, and he thinks they're angels, and he's so impressed with them. He says, "Well, who are you?" And he says, "I want to become a knight." And they were kind of laughing at this young Welsh boy, as it were. Anyway, he does actually find him. He finds his way to Camelot, to the court of the Round Table of King Arthur, and he actually does become a knight. And he decides to return from Camelot back to his home to see his mother, and he gets lost. Evidently, this is where the myth begins, in a sense. He gets lost and he comes to a river, and he can't cross the river, and he sees a fisherman in the boat, and he calls out to the fisherman, "How do I get across the water?" And the fisherman says, "Well, you just climb in the rock, you go through the rock, climb to the top, and you can see the tower on the other side, and that's where I live, and you can stay the night with me in the tower." So he goes through a crevice in the rock, and he climbs to the top, and he can see the tower. Now it's interesting because that signifies rebirth. So he climbs through a rock like he's going to be reborn in a passage grave, and that's symbolic of going into the womb of the earth and being reborn. So he comes out the top, and it says in Chrétien de Troyes' Perceval, the Grail legend, it says that he sees this tower, and it's likened to a tower in Berytus, which is the Phoenician Byblos. And we talked about the king of Byblos and Osiris in the acacia tree, and that becomes the middle pillar of the temple of the king of Byblos. Well, so the tower of the Grail castle was likened to a tower in Byblos, and the chief Phoenician god El is Saturn, and he built Byblos. So you could say the Grail castle was built by Saturn, and so he finds himself near the Grail castle on the other side of the river, and it's noted as the land of the dead because the river symbolises the threshold between this world and the other world. And in actual fact, the fisherman in the boat is actually his ancestor, the Fisher King, whom he meets inside the Grail castle when he goes in. And he's wearing a red robe when he enters into the Grail castle, and he finds his ancestor also in a red robe or a purple robe, the purple signifying the king, the Fisher King. And he's lying on a couch in the centre of 4 pillars. So again, it's alluding to the central pillar of the hall, of the great hall, and the hall is in the shape of a cube. So you could say that the wounded fisher king, who's sick, lying on a couch, symbolises the middle pillar, or the death of Osiris, who's also a fish god. He's the fisher king as well. He's the fish god of the Nile. He's the Nile god and the fish god of the Nile, and represents the middle pillar, or the Lord God appearing in the pillar of fire and cloud. And right before him, as he's lying there in between these four pillars in the cube. Now the cube could be the black cube of Saturn, because we're in a very dark state, and there's a blazing fire. So the middle pillar, the fire, etc. And inside the black cube, now inside the ash, the black ash, there's the red ember. And that red ember is the garnet crystal, the third eye, or the garnet crystal, because the garnet is the carbuncle, and the Latin for carbuncle is carbo, coal. It's actually carbo, coal, but also carbon. And carbon, you might say, is in all living things, in all organic living things is carbon. So you might say that the garnet crystal, or the carbuncle, is the interface between the inorganic dead and the living organic life. And that's the ember in the ash that suddenly becomes alive with life and fire. And so that you've got the black cube and the red scarlet, wearing the scarlet, and Parsifal's destiny is to cure the Grail king. He's supposed to cure the Grail king. So he represents sacrifice and redemption. And I said before that you've got the black cubic tomb of Osiris, which is the fisher king. Then you have the red cubic altar, which is the sacrifice and redemption of the sun hero, Horus, red cloak, or Parsifal wearing the scarlet robe, and Jesus wearing the scarlet robe on his way to the crucifixion, where he appears as a serpent hanging on the pole, which is the B666, which is the number of man. So Jesus, the man, will die and be reborn as the spiritual Christ. So man has to be overcome. The human being has to be transcended. So you transcend and you become a spiritual being of light. So you've got Parsifal representing the red cubic altar, which is the flaming fire between the four pillars. And then he goes into another room and he's going to have a feast. So he's sitting at the table, he's going to have a feast. And he has a vision of the Grail. And the Grail is the vessel of gold, or the sun disk, or the UFO of various forms. And so you have, again, the illusion, if it's a golden light, then it lights up the room, and then you have the golden cubic throne of the king. So you have, again, the alchemical transformation of death, transformation and rebirth within the Grail legend, going for, you might say, from room to room. And they're eating the pomegranate at the emerald table, but it's also the garnet table. It's actually a garnet crystal. It's described as a garnet crystal. So they're eating on a garnet crystal table, and they're eating pomegranates. Well, the Latin granatum means pomegranate, and that means that the pomegranate, Latin granatum, actually is the etymology of the garnet, because the crystals of the garnet look like the seeds of the pomegranate. When you open the pomegranate, the red gold pomegranate, you have these red like seeds, and so they liken that to the actual garnet. So again we have the symbol of the garnet, and the Grail King is wearing the black skull cap of Pa, the god of the pyramid, and on the top of the skull cap, the black skull cap, which represents the black sun, is a red crystal. So the red crystal again is the garnet, the third eye, and of course Parsifal has a vision of the Grail, so you could say his third eye is opened. So when the serpent says to Eve, "You will not die but be as gods, knowing good and evil, for the tree is to be desired to make you wise," and then it says that Eve saw with her eyes that the fruit was good to eat. So that means the serpent, the dragon, the serpent, opened the third eye of Eve so that she could see that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was good to eat because it made you wise. So she became an initiate, she was awakened, and she obviously represents the Kundalini awakening as well. And another root meaning of the garnet, the etymology of the garnet, is the Kermes worm. So the Kermes worm is the worm could represent the serpent or the dragon, the worm, and from that worm you extract a scarlet dye. So you have the scarlet dye, which is the robe of sacrifice and redemption in Jesus, Parsifal, Horus, and so again you have the Kundalini, you have Isis, the red serpent, and you have the truncated pyramid with the eye in the center, which you see on the American dollar bill. That's the eye of Horus, that's the eye of vision, it's the visionary eye of the seer, of the initiate. It's the eye of Buddha in the sense of Kundalini. And in alchemy it says that when the king emerges from the fire, he's wearing the diadem of the heart, and the diadem of the heart, the crown of the heart, has the carbuncle at its centre, again the third eye. And in the Grail legend by Wolfram von Eschenbach, Parzival, a German writer, Chrétien de Troyes, who wrote Percival, is actually a French writer, but the German writer, he actually talks about the unicorn, the white beast unicorn, laying its head in the lap of a virgin, and then the carbuncle is removed from the base of his horn, the spiral horn, which again is the third eye, the centre of the forehead. Now, when Jesus dies on the cross, he's the serpent on the cross, and that represents Satan, it represents the beast 666. And there's the image of the Pieta. Now the Pieta is his mother sitting down, and he's lying, he's dying or he's dead, he's lying with his head in her lap, and she's the Virgin Mary. So his head is the beast 666. And we're told that the unicorn puts its head in the lap of the Virgin. So again, you could say that the beast 666 is related to the unicorn. Now that's very interesting, because in Egyptian mythology, Osiris is the royal lion. He represents the royal lion, the royal solar lion, the golden lion, and he hunts the unicorn in the desert. Now Set is the god of the desert, and he's symbolized by the unicorn. So the unicorn is the sacrificial beast with the red garnet, the sacrificial bloodstone, and he's also, Set is also known as the Red One, and the deserts of Upper Egypt in the south, they're known as the Red Lands. So he's the Red One as the magician. He's the sacrificial unicorn that the lion kills, and he's also the goat god, the devil, the goat god. He's the serpent that poisons Horus, and he's the bear. He's the constellation Great Bear, which was, in ancient times, it was the closest to the pole star in Draco, because he's the brother of Osiris. He was the closest to the pole star, and the Great Bear, Ursa Major, and Horus is the little bear, Ursa Minor, and the two bears fight, and just as the lion and the unicorn. And so you could say the carbuncle coming from the sacrificial unicorn, or the B66, and then the third eye, which is, you might say, the prize, the jewel in the crown. No, it's the prize that you get. So you might say the prize of the heart, the diadem of the heart, is the third eye, is the visionary third eye. And in ancient Egypt, the king wears a golden crown, but that can take the form of the uraeus, the cobra that encircles his head or brow, and his head, where the third eye is, he puts his head. So the uraeus cobra, his head is where the third eye is. And the uraeus also encircles the sun, which is the same thing, the golden ring of the sun, which is the signet ring of the initiates. So I think that would be probably a good place to finish part 2. So I hope you enjoyed it.